have a lot to talk about, obviously, politically this week, and a couple of special announcements.
Actually, Brian, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. We just can't
I
see
can
you.
talk. I
Uh,
can't. I apologize, everybody. I had a little bit of a childcare issue I had to deal with, and so I'm going to be a few minutes late on the video, but I will be talking to you in the meantime.
we have his mellifluous dulcet tones there.
There you
But
go.
we
Dulcet. It's
should
nice.
let you know up front here that next week we will have Abby Livingston from Puck, who knows Congress as well as anyone, is going to be joining us. And we also set up a guest appearance with Connor Lamb, the former congressman from Pennsylvania, is going to be with us at the end of February, which is significant because he's going to be on with us the day after the State of the Union address. And I'm sure there's going to be all kinds of things to unpack on that day. So we'll let you know that stuff now. Um, as we get started. We obviously have to start with everything with ICE, immigration enforcement, Congress. Are we going to shut down? Um, and there's a lot of uncertainty out there at the moment as to what is actually going to happen and when. But I will say that Republicans have reacted in such a way that, at least to me, tells a very clear story, which is they know they're in trouble on this issue. They are looking for any way out of the problem, and they are going to make concessions here, which is very, very, very rare for a majority party to be this amenable to concessions. Now we'll see if they're willing to go far enough for anything to be meaningful, but they're certainly at least looking for fig leaves. They're certainly talking to the Democrats. This is not October where they dug in and said nothing until the government's open, at least Senate Republicans.
So I want to say on this point that it is kind of shocking the extent to which Republicans have really retreated from their hardline pro ICE position over the past, I don't know, 48, 72 hours. I mean,
Yeah.
I think they recognize that this was, not tenable to support what Trump is doing, what ICE is doing. It's a huge and dramatic shift. And, I think last we talked about this a couple days ago, I think on Sunday, about the government shutdown. I think we both thought there'd be a government shutdown. I don't think there's going to be one, to be honest. My sense of it is that Republicans want to avoid it. And frankly, can you blame them? I mean, would you want to have a fight right now over ICE, considering how unpopular ICE is?
No, I mean, look, politically, they're doing what you would expect from a sane, reasonable party that can read polling and look at focus groups and things. The
Right, but
only
that
thing is,
hasn't
I
been the
don't think
Republican Party for a long time, has it?
that's exactly right. That's where I was going next. But that's not the Republican Party we've seen for years, where they do the same normal political thing. I still think there's going to be a shutdown, but I don't think it's going to be particularly long. I just don't think that they can get all the moving pieces together, especially with the House out before Friday.
Yeah, that's
Um,
the one big problem, is to get the House back and to get the House to agree to whatever the Senate agrees to. That is going to be the
and
big challenge here.
there's a particularly tricky element to the House side of this, which is, first of all, they don't want to reopen the six bill appropriations package. So they want this to be separate legislation. Okay, but then you need a pledge from Mike Johnson to put it on the floor next week. You also have a situation here, though, where rule votes have traditionally almost always been party line votes in the House, right? And the House Freedom Caucus has dug in opposing reforms and things. And so there's
And
some
things
concern.
and things. That's a
I,
nice addendum right there, Brian. And
I
things.
mean, that is the Freedom Caucus for you. They oppose everything pretty much that might be sane or rational. Um, but it creates a situation in which there's some skepticism as to what can actually pass in the House unless Trump really leans in on things. And Democrats in the Senate are not going to get hoodwinked here. They're not going to go along without a real clear pledge to pass something. And we don't know what that something looks like yet. I was shocked to hear Brian Schatz last night.
Yeah, the Schatz comment was pretty striking, don't you think? He said that he thought they were going to get to a resolution on this.
Yeah, he said he thought they could land the plane. And to be clear, Brian Schatz is the heir apparent to be the Democratic whip.
Absolutely.
It
Well,
would.
you could argue he's the heir apparent to be the next majority leader.
I was going there next.
Oh,
Our
sorry,
minds
sorry.
are in sync. I was gonna say you could argue that in 2029 he is likely to be the Democratic leader. Um, he's connected, and if he thinks they're gonna land the plane, I think that that's a really strong signal. Now we do not know anything about what the Republicans have offered in the way of concessions. We don't know, where this is. We also don't know if when it becomes public that the two bases blow up over it. But that was not what I expected at all to hear. I really did not, couldn't have fathomed that Republicans would basically just cave, and cave without a shutdown, and that they genuinely, the Republican field of opinion kind of is all over the place. You've got Rand Paul and his ilk who are kind of more libertarian, who are upset from a civil libertarian standpoint, and rightfully so. You've got the Tom Tillys of the world who are just tired of the idiocy of Kristi
So
Noem.
can we? I want to talk about Tillis. Let me put a
Okay.
pin in that. 'Cause I want to get back to Tillis in a second. But go ahead.
Then you have the ones who are putting out what I would call mealy mouthed statements because they know they have to say something and don't actually want to do anything. And then you have your loser caucus, we can call them, the Mark Wayne Mullins of the world, who are digging into how they're
Has
not going
Mullen
to.
dug in? Because he is the most slavish Trump defender. Has he dug in? I haven't even noticed,
Yeah,
to be honest.
he said, I don't remember which thing I was reading this morning, but it's a brief digression. I read like 5 or 6 newsletters in the morning to get ready when we're on Wednesdays. But he said to someone that he wasn't willing to handcuff ICE, in any way. So he's kind of digging in terms of what he'll actually tolerate. And the real reason why they may not be able to separate out the Homeland Security bill is that they need unanimous consent in the Senate. Again, we're down in the procedural weeds, but that means that any Mark Wayne Mullen of the world can block it and interfere with what they're doing. Um, and then we also have our last caucus in the Republican Party, Michael, the one that you know all too well, the Susan Collins Expressing Concern caucus.
Yeah,
Where
but the Expressing Concern caucus has like so Tillis I mean Tillis is kind of I guess expressing concern has gone beyond expressing concern.
right.
But I do think that what Tillis is interesting because he has basically taken the position that that Noam should resign. I think Murkowski took the position
Yeah,
also.
those were the
And
two.
those are the two. And like I don't know if Noam is going to survive this because I mean also by the way, and this is less important, but John Fetterman also called for Noam to resign. And Fetterman has been like the most pro-Trump Democrat in the Senate. So that is sort of interesting. Uh, the Tillis thing is, look, he's retiring, so he's free. But I still am surprised at how far he's gone in criticizing Trump and criticizing ICE. And he called Miller incompetent. He called Noam incompetent. I mean, those are fighting words.
Yep.
It's pretty striking.
And the thing to keep your eye on with Tillis is some of this the Judiciary Committee has oversight on, and he's on that committee, and he can flip the power dynamics in the committee, with his vote. But it really is kind of striking, and I agree with you. I think Noam ends up taking the fall for this because Stephen Miller is the ultimate Machiavellian inside, knife fighter. And realistically speaking, he's at the root of all of this. He's the cause. He's the problem. It's his ideology. It's his push for aggressive tactics. Noam was basically a puppet, who was pliant in a way that the first term DHS secretaries were not. But realistically speaking, he's throwing her and CBP under the bus because he doesn't want to take the hit for this. And he tends to be a survivor. So I think that she gets shoved out. And they try to find some.
Can I just say, he is such a coward. I mean, basically, he had the gall to actually like leak some story. I think it was to Axios. I can't remember who
Yeah,
got it.
no, it was.
Basically, blaming CBP for the terrorist, rhetoric they were using about Alex Preddy, which is just horseshit because it was
Yep.
it was Miller who was pushing this line, and it's like if I'm CBP, I am just beyond furious about this. Like he has pushed them to arrest 3,000 people a day. He has pushed them to, basically threaten to fire people. He's demoted people. And now when push comes to shove and when the shit hits the fan, he basically like says, you guys, I'm putting you guys under the bus.
Yep. I mean that's Stephen Miller for you. I honestly think, Michael, we could sit here and spend about 10 minutes going through every negative adjective we could think of, and they'd all apply to Stephen Miller. He is just an absolutely
He's an ogre.
putrid human being.
He's one of the worst people in public life that maybe the worst I've ever seen. I mean, he's a racist. He's a white supremacist. He's a just, I mean,
And
divisive, a coward. I mean, everything you come up with.
well, I actually think I sent something to Michael a half hour ago. I said, guess the columnist on the headline. And he said, I don't know. And the headline was, um, it was Americans should not trust ICE. Kristi Noem isn't the only reason. And there was a paragraph here that just absolutely jumped out at me that applies to Miller. Graphic journalism can change the world. It did so in May 1963 when Theophilus Eugene Bull Connor, the commissioner of public safety in Birmingham, Alabama, used body slamming fire hoses and snarling dogs against young black civil rights demonstrators. The nation was appalled and, as important, embarrassed by the protests, by photos and videos of what was being done in the streets by government. Minneapolis is today's Birmingham. And I made this comparison for my subscribers over the weekend to the civil rights era and lawmen who were lawbreakers. But that came from George Will,
Yeah,
okay,
well,
of
but
all people.
George Will has, he's gotten a little more woke over the past couple of years, I would say.
He has, but I like that comparison because Bull Connor and I mentioned Jim Clark, who was the sheriff who was responsible for Selma. They are what I think about when I think about Stephen Miller and his ilk,
I agree.
because
I
just
agree.
absolutely horrific human beings. And Miller, it wouldn't shock me to see him totally lose his influence. I don't think he's going to get fired, but Trump does not like people who cause him blowback, and Miller is really at the core of all of this.
Right. But the thing with Miller, you have to remember that he's he's the only survivor I can think of from Trump 1. Was there anybody else from Trump 1 who is still
There
working in
there
the
are a
White House?
bunch of like smaller figures. Like, isn't Sergio Glor still around there somewhere?
I don't even,
Um,
I don't even sure I know who that is, to be honest.
he was like the head of personnel or something in the first term. Like there's a bunch of like people we don't know. The one who's reported to be his mistress, Trump's mistress, I don't even remember her name.
Oh
Is
yeah, the blonde woman. Yeah, I know what you're
Yeah.
talking about.
But like they're those kinds of people, but of the significant people, of the core, of the team, of people who are in high ranking positions, he's the only one. Um and he's done it by being absolutely obsequious and absolutely deferential and will defend anything. Um, and he loves to go fight on television, which Trump likes. Like, he is the ultimate survivor. I agree. The first time in a long, long, long time I've ever agreed with Lindsey Graham, who said he's going to be walking out with Trump at the end of the administration. I think that's basically right. I just wonder if his influence is dulled some, if there are other voices that get into Trump's ear saying, "Hey, you want to move in this other direction here." I mean, the Problem Solvers Caucus asked for a meeting with Trump to discuss bipartisan immigration reform. Now, you could grow quite old expecting bipartisan immigration reform to
Yeah,
happen.
that's not going to happen.
No, but it is certainly something that like Trump could move somewhat in that direction, and it would benefit him politically. And I bet that a lot of his political people are telling him that. And it could be that Stephen Miller's influence is somewhat minimized because every single poll and focus group is just ghastly for these people. Um, Americans are right and rightfully so aghast at what they've seen, and they are revolting because there's this simple dichotomy that even the ones who support border security, even the ones who were kind of behind Trump's immigration agenda at the beginning of the term, thinking that he would go after those who had committed felonies and violent criminals, are not in favor of what we're seeing now, are not in favor of the Gestapo like tactics, the threatening of observers in places, and just all kinds. Hey, there
I'm
you
back.
are.
There I am.
We
Only took
we
15
have you
minutes.
back. Uh,
Good to be here. Sorry about that,
yeah.
guys. Sometimes life gets in the way. So, you guys understand, I'm sure.
I
Those of
mean,
you have kids.
Michael, everybody in America has to understand for the last 2 days, right? I mean, I spent 5 hours shoveling and snow blowing and chopping ice and
I want to get to that in a second, actually, but I wanted to finish up what you were saying. Look, I think the bottom line here is that the White House. You ever see Full Metal Jacket?
no.
Love that
Uh,
movie. Oh, you didn't? It's a great movie, and there's a great line right after the Tet Offensive where this Marine, colonel or something, is saying that, talking about what a disaster it is. He says it's a giant shit sandwich, and everyone has to take a bite. And that's basically what this is. This is a giant shit sandwich,
yeah.
and it has done enormous damage to the White House. Look, I saw this poll out yesterday from The Economist, which is I think it's YouGov, so it's like pretty good, not a great pollster. And they had him among Hispanics at 27 approval, 68 disapproval.
And Michael,
That's 41 points underwater.
I think that was pre Alex Preddy murder. That poll.
Was it? I don't know.
It was floating around yesterday, but my impression was it had been in the field before Saturday.
Oh, maybe. Maybe partly in before and partly after. I mean, one thing that's interesting is that poll had a huge shift from the last Economist poll among Hispanics, like a double-digit shift. But the thing was, I've seen numerous polls over the past, week or two that, or not week or two, I'm sorry, last 24 hours that have shown like a really dramatic shift, decline, I should say, in Trump's support among independents and among Hispanics. So I just think that this is having a really significant political effect and a negative one.
Sarah Longwell from the Bulwark did a focus group the other day with Biden to Trump voters. And this was Monday. So this was, or either Sunday or Monday. It was after this murder. And they just absolutely excoriated Trump, these voters. And these are people who voted for him.
So no, can I say at that point, I am generally skeptical of focus groups, although I thought that was interesting articles, but I don't know how seriously to take it. What I thought was actually even more interesting was an article in the Washington Post about how the Preddy story, the Preddy shooting, Preddy tragedy, was breaking through in ways that the Rene Good shooting did not. And they point out that like on, Reddits and people's like Instagrams, you have people who just don't talk about politics very often, just commenting. And I noticed the same thing. A lot of people sort of saying like, I don't talk about politics very much, but I need to say something about this because what's happening is awful. And I think that is an interesting shift. I mean, even like among pro athletes, right? A lot of them, not many of them spoke out after the Rene Good shooting. A lot of them spoke out after the Alex Preddy shooting. And I saw Victor Wembanyama yesterday. My kid is crawling down below, not to be on camera. I really appreciate that kid. No, this is a huge shift. And I think it's one of these moments where it's like, actually, I mentioned Tet Offensive a few minutes ago. It's kind of like that a little bit, where there's like this inflection point. You can't really think of like, I think we will look back and think of Trump's first term as this is sort of a little bit of I want to say before and after moment, but an inflection point, a point at which, look, he's been unpopular for a long time, but I think this is the point when he's going to lose even more support, but also lose this sort of solid Republican support. I mean, you got Republicans calling for Kristi Noem to be impeached or to, I don't know if impeached, I should say, to step down. I mean, that's a major, major shift. We have not seen that up to this point. So I do think this is really like a huge inflection point in the Trump presidency. And look, is there evidence that they're figuring it out, that they're responding positively? I don't feel like there is. And knowing Trump, he will find some way to impulsively screw this up. So I think I think this is just really bad, and I think this is not going to get better. I don't think Trump has it in him to truly shift his approach. I mean, look, if you wanted to shift the approach on ICE, you would get rid of Stephen Miller. That's because he's the one driving this. He's the one driving this, but he won't do that. And I mean, if he does that, then you'll know that they really that a major shift is coming. I think you're going to see, less. I think the Minneapolis deployment is going to decrease at some point. I don't know if they're going to go into Maine now. I mean, and look, the fact that Bovino is out of the picture. I mean, this Bovino guy is he's like a fascist. I mean, he really is awful. I mean, the fact that he accused Preddy, he blamed the victim after the shooting and basically said the real victims were the ICE agents. I mean, give me a fucking break. That's a huge thing. Bovino being out of the picture is a huge thing. I don't trust Tom Homan as far as I can throw him, but he's better.
He's more competent than Bobino.
I mean, barely, but okay, fine. I mean, I guess that's a low bar in this administration, but I guess I'll take it. But I just think that Maxine says they're trying to change the narrative, not stop the raids. I think that's right, actually. I think that's exactly right. Now, that's not so much in Minneapolis. I think they will slow it down. But you're right. They're not stopping this. And I don't think the quota of 3,000 arrests a day has really gone away.
Well, I do think that this is going to be what's interesting in terms of what comes out of Congress here. And because I agree with you that Trump is not going to suddenly change his stripes, that Trump and Miller certainly isn't. But the Republicans who actually have to be on the ballot in November
Yeah.
may be more inclined to limit what Trump and Miller can do. And I don't know that Trump is going to veto something in this ballpark because, as you said, I think we have to understand the moment that we're in. I was on Instagram, which is my non-political social media site. I just follow random people whose lives are
Sure.
interesting or they have recipes, you name it, or authors, whatever it is. And I saw a staggering number of these people who were putting stories up over the weekend about this. I wonder how many of America's Catholics who were in the pews on Sunday morning heard about this from their priest. You know,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. 100%. And
and
they're going to hear about it this weekend, I'm sure too.
right,
Absolutely.
and let's remember there. I talked to a couple of people who disagree with Michael and I on the Renee Good shooting. And saw several prominent people, including Jonah Goldberg from the Dispatch, fell into this category, who were absolutely aghast at this and were, said this is murder, this is, or at least a crime, this is something that should be charged for. This unified everyone. That I never thought, Michael, that there would ever be a day in America that I agreed with the NRA on anything,
I know,
ever.
right?
I mean, the gun rights groups, the argument, even Trump doubling and tripling down last night in
I know.
Iowa
I know. Yeah.
on this, that, well, the problem was he had a gun. Well, there are members of his coalition who have been Republicans because of one issue, the Second Amendment.
Absolutely. Yeah, no.
It,
Look, and he said things about bringing guns to protests that frankly Joe Biden had or Barack Obama never said. And I think that, look, I'm going to say for the record, I hate Second Amendment. I hate guns. I think guns should be banned. That's basically my position on it. I think, by the way, I'm just going to say it out there that bringing a gun to a protest is a bad idea because the reality, and this is a very sad statement to make, and I don't blame this Alex Preddy for this, but the presence of a gun, it often leads to violence, and it did in this particular situation. That is not an indictment of Alex Preddy. It's an indictment of just the ubiquity of guns in our society. But the reality is that the presence of a gun, I had this point about people who bring guns in their
anything,
home to protect themselves. Like, actually, if you bring a gun in your home, the chances of someone in that house, apartment or whatever, gets killed by a gun, like, exponentially increases. It's like Chekhov's gun.
I
The
mean,
presence of a gun leads to gun violence. So don't bring guns to protest, in my view. But having said that, it is the law. Okay. And I have listened to conservatives for decades tell me that people should be allowed to bring guns to protest. So for this administration, which is as anti-gun control as you could possibly get, to come out and say that you shouldn't bring a gun to a protest. I mean, the hypocrisy is just off the
no, no,
charts.
let's draw a sharper point here. It's not just that they said you shouldn't bring a gun to a protest. It's that they basically said if you have a gun in a protest, you are fair game to be murdered. Which is the antithesis of the First Amendment and the Second Amendment.
Yes.
That
Yes.
look, I don't think the Supreme Court's jurisprudence is right on the Second Amendment. In fact, I think it is historically false and absolutely hackish. I agree wholeheartedly with Michael about guns. That the number of times you read about a horrible like mass incident that turned out to somebody's gun misfired at a block party or something like that, and everybody else, whipped out their guns. Like you hear this stuff all the time. Guns only lead to tragedy, in
Yes.
my view.
Yes.
However, if we sat there for decades having these people shove the Second Amendment
Yes.
down our
Yes.
throats. This
Yes.
is a sacrosanct right. I mean, I go back to Sandy Hook. They murdered elementary school children, and these people wouldn't even budge to say that everyone had to go through a background check.
Yep.
Fuck
No
them
disagreement. No
was my
disagreement.
attitude for decades and decades. And now the hypocrisy of a Republican administration basically saying that the Second Amendment doesn't exist if you want to engage in political speech and protest your government. I mean, that they should be losing conservatives in droves over
Uh,
this.
Look, I'm going to say I used to write a lot more on gun violence, and I basically stopped because, to be very honest, it was causing me like a lot of personal stress to write about it because I write stories about children being killed and innocent people dying for no good reason, for not needlessly. And I don't know if you know the story, but back in 2017, when the Las Vegas shooting happened, which is the worst mass shooting in American history, I was in Las Vegas. I was at a casino, and I walked down and I wrote a story about it. And I talked to a lot of the survivors. It was one of the most harrowing experiences of my entire life. And I feel very strongly. I mean, my hatred of guns and my hatred of gun rights in this country is, you're not going to find many people who hate them more than I do. But you, if you're gonna, the chutzpah. And look, it just says
That's what it is.
I agree that you shouldn't bring a gun to a protest. Okay, I agree with that. But for the people in this administration to say that after they spent years defending people like Kyle Rittenhouse and people who like went to the Michigan State House with guns and people on January 6th who had guns, like fuck them. Like
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
truly.
it's beyond the pale. It's beyond the pale.
It really is. And I mean, that has driven a wedge into their coalition too, at a time that they're already losing people and already losing voters. And I also do wonder about some of the religious groups, um, because this is uncomfortable for a lot of them. Even the evangelical churches that are as far right wing as you're going to get have been growing with Hispanic, Americans.
Yeah.
And some of what we've heard reported, some of the tactics here, some of the racial profiling is really off-putting to people, and it is deeply problematic. I mean, Maria Elvira Shriver, I think Salazar, I'm sorry, Maria Elvira Salazar, the congresswoman from South Florida, basically came out with a warning saying, "I've been saying this for months. You're going to get crushed in the midterms
Yeah.
because we're going to get crushed with Hispanic voters." And I especially take that as relevant because, Florida still wants to redistrict, but the place they want to redistrict is in South Florida. And if they get creamed with Hispanic voters, that is something that could cost Salazar her seat, Carlos Jimenez his seat. Anything they redraw down there could turn into a dummy mander. I mean, the people who actually know are warning Republicans that they are on the cusp here of, something really serious politically. And that's why I say I'm going to be very curious as to see where Congress lands on this at the end of the week or the beginning of next week, because it's not real clear what exactly is being discussed in terms of legislative action and reforms. Is this just going to be a mask ban or something on warrants? Is it going to be something with standards on violence and the use of force? We're not sure as to what exactly this is going to be, but it has to be major reforms for Democrats to go for it at this point.
So I agree, and I suspect Republicans are going to give in on this stuff. I want to bring up one other point about the ICE stuff and the response to it. The argument, it's an argument, I guess it is. Laksha Jain had a poll up today about asking people about favorable opinion of ICE. And look, there's different polling, had different results, but two things just jumped out to me in this poll. Among Hispanics, do you have a favorable opinion of ICE? Is 29 favorable, 69 unfavorable. But here's the really interesting one. Among 18 and 29-year-olds, 19% favorability, 75% unfavorable. The closest to that is 44-year-olds, which is 30-64, which is obviously bad, but not as bad as 1975. But I bring this up because you had a lot of talk last year about how Democrats need to win back young people, right? They lost the young people. And people like me were out there saying, shouting into the void, saying, no, this was just an anti-incumbent, economic anxiety kind of vote by young people. And they really, you couldn't argue there was a shift in young people's support for the Democrats based on one election. And what you've seen is, of course, Trump's numbers among 29-year-olds are terrible. But here's what's interesting. It's not this poll I just read to you, 1975 favorability about ICE. This is not a question about what do you think about Trump or what do you think about the Republican Party? What do you think about ICE? And what that says to me is that young people, more than any other group in America, are outraged by the tactics that ICE are using. And that suggests that the alleged shift that we saw, this argument you did hear from some people that, young people are becoming more conservative. If they're getting more conservative, then I don't think you'd see a 19 to 75 view about what ICE is doing, right? I mean, look at 45 to 64-year-olds is 41-56. They don't like it, but they're more supportive of it. So I do think that what you've seen is a sort of a reversion to the mean in American politics over the past couple of weeks and months. That young people who had voted overwhelmingly for Democrats in 16, 18, 20, 22,
No,
uh, are
go
returning to their form. Yeah, but
go.
you go back even further. Yeah, you go back even further.
The trend goes back to 2004. Every cycle, as a new cohort came into the electorate, they were more Democratic than the last one until this last cohort. And I think, look, Democrats and liberals more so than Democrats need to be cognizant of the fact that there are things culturally and institutionally that I think some young voters are giving or have had pause with and are not fully on board with. And I don't think that they should look at polling and say, oh, see, we don't have to change anything. I don't think that's ever good for any side politically to just ignore, to have hubris when the snapback happens. However, I basically agree with Michael. If you look at the Harvard Youth Poll, which is the gold standard
Yeah, yeah,
on
yeah,
young
yeah.
people, I have seen for a while that 18 to 24-year-olds were more conservative on a lot of the issue questions than 25 to 29-year-olds. But we're talking a couple of points. We're not talking some sea change. We're talking, 3, 4, 5 points. And I think that part of the narrative that has gotten wrong is that there was a certain shift among a lot of groups of a couple of points that might be more durable, but it got overshadowed by, as Michael said, economic anxiety, unhappiness with the incumbent party, and people made this out to be some sort of total sea change where all of a sudden conservative or young men are conservatives. And I think that really overstates the case. It's deeply problematic for Republicans. And the same thing, you could say the same things about Hispanic voters. You could say the same things about Black voters.
100%,
All of
100%.
these groups. And meanwhile, and I know Michael doesn't know where I'm going, but he's gonna like what I have to say. Um, the group that really has shifted the most over the last decade is suburban white women, college
Yeah,
educated suburban
yeah,
white women who absolutely loathe the GOP. I mean, we've talked about the strong disapproval stuff last week before this murder
yeah.
on Saturday. And I can only imagine. I have not seen a good poll that was from this week yet, but by the end of the week, we should be getting some polling on this, and it is going to be very interesting. And this is, Michael sent me a chart this morning, and it's a chart that I've looked at a bunch of times, which is the biggest divider in American politics right now. And gender may be headed there, but it's educational attainment. The states
Yeah.
with the highest
No, no,
rates
no,
of
no, 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 no. It's white people educational attainment. It's
right,
white
white.
people.
That's right. It's white
Very
people.
important to make that distinction.
Michael and I, our demographic is not the problem, basically, is what we're saying to you.
Yeah,
But I look at states like Utah and Kansas, which are the highest red states in terms of percentage of people with bachelor degrees. And those are places that I wonder, do states and districts like that, we've talked before, I think, about the WOW suburbs outside of
yeah,
Milwaukee,
yeah,
which
yeah,
are like the last northern suburbs in America that have held on as Republican
yeah.
strongholds, even as they've weakened a little bit. Do some of these places flip in 2026? Because we're seeing we're seeing educated white women going in places that I never thought you could see that kind of gender gap on some of this stuff. And I mean, one thing that was floating around this morning, Sharice Davids in Kansas is undertaking a statewide listening tour. And I wonder if she's seeing internal polling showing that Kansas is shaky at this point. Remember, Democrats haven't won a Senate seat in Kansas since 1936.
Are you serious?
But
It's
yeah,
that long?
it's
Wow.
the longest gap, I believe, for either party, for the minority party in any state, in winning a Senate race. And the last time they were really competitive, I think, was Bill Roy, in the Watergate year against Bob Dole. Bill Roy was the rare guy. Michael will like this trivia point. It's a rare member of Congress who was both a doctor and a lawyer. And he lost because Bob Dole hit on the abortion issue. Roy was an obstetrician, and Dole hit on the abortion issue late in the campaign and came from behind and won by like 2 points. So that
Yeah.
was the last time they were competitive, and obviously we're talking about a quarter century there. But it's interesting to me. You don't usually undertake statewide listening tours if you're a Congress member
No, no,
if you're
no,
not
no.
thinking about statewide office.
You're thinking about statewide office. All right. Can I let me
And
bring?
Yeah,
Let me
go for it.
a couple points here. So Maxine asked, was it about young people voting for Trump? Was it really more people voting different or more people staying home? It's a little bit of both, but I think
Oh,
it's more voting different. I mean, there's no question that Democrats were hurt by the fact that a lot of Democratic voters stayed home in safe blue seats, like blue states. I make this point all the time that Kamala Harris ran, I think, 3 points or 2 or 3 points ahead of the national average. The national shift was like what? I think 6.5, 6 points or 6.5 points, maybe 6 or 7, and it was around there. And so, but the shift in swing states was much less. So she did better in swing states, and part of the reason why she did better in swing states is because people voted and people were more active to vote, more encouraged to vote. But people stayed home in other places, so that I think did hurt her. But there was a shift in Hispanic voting patterns and young people voting patterns. Again, I think that's been completely reversed over the past year. And I think, look, the point I want to get to about the disapproval among young people of ICE says to me that the cultural factors that were driving young people to the Democratic Party are still in place. So you might see young people up for grabs when you have a weak economy, people are worried about the state of the economy, or they don't trust the person, the Democratic candidate. But I think what is really interesting about the ICE thing again is that it just suggests that like these people, the young people, are the most inclined to be revolted by what they're seeing there, and that suggests to me that's a problem for Republicans because it suggests that there is a barrier between young people and the modern Republican Party, the MAGA Party, and that it's going to be very hard going forward for MAGA to use the same kind of cultural attacks, racial attacks that they have used with other voting groups with young people. The
I
second point, go ahead. I want to bring up
I
some more
wanted to build
comments.
three points off of what Michael was saying.
Wait,
The
wait,
first,
okay, yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
yeah, because we're on young voter. No, you go ahead. I'll come back to young voters in a minute.
Okay, so I want to mention also the Lynn Muster says are asked if we were surprised by the Minnesota special results from last night, special election. A district where Harris won by 70 points, the Democrat won by I think 91 points. I mean, look, this is slightly better than what Democrats have done in special elections throughout 2025 and now 2026. But look, this was a special election in St. Paul. I mean, I think Democrats, I don't know how much to read into this. Democrats are energized in Minnesota, uh, not surprisingly. So I think that, that may be more a question of just Democrats being really, really pissed off and turning out to vote. But I will say this, if you're a Republican in Minnesota, you are in
Oh,
big trouble.
you know
Big
what?
trouble.
Let me make a point off of that before I get back to young voters. The one of the candidates for governor in Minnesota, and I believe I read that he was representing the ICE agent who murdered Renee
Yes, he
Good.
was. He was,
Um,
yes.
he dropped out of the race and
Yeah,
basically seemed to indicate he was switching parties because he said he couldn't look his kids in the face to be a
yeah,
member of a party behaving like this.
yeah.
And the reason, again, that this is relevant is Republicans started this redistricting war. And Minnesota is a place where the legislature is closely divided. And if Democrats get a trifecta, it wouldn't shock me to see a 4-4 map become 6-2. Tom Emmer, the Republican whip, may be gone in 2028. And it looks like a place where they are going to just absolutely get eviscerated electorally in November. Amy Klobuchar, should she choose to actually launch a campaign, is going to be governor.
She did launch the campaign, didn't she?
I think she was planning on doing it on
I
Monday
I
and has
thought
now
she
postponed
celebrated.
it, but
I thought she celebrated by throwing binders at all the interns in her Senate office.
oh, come
I love
on.
that joke.
Maybe she just had a salad with
No, no, no.
a comb.
I'm going to be clear on this point. Bosses who are abusive to their staff, and I've worked for bosses like that, they are dead to me, and I will never forgive Klobuchar. Not only because she did these things, but she never apologized for it. And in fact, she kind of used it as an excuse, as a way to say like, "Oh, look how tough I am as a woman." No, no, no.
Uh,
Sorry, Amy. You'll never get my support.
I never understand anyone mistreating anybody who works for them. But
Yeah,
let
it's
me go back
terrible.
to youth voters before I forget. 3 points that I think are relevant. The first is I see in focus group stuff, and again, as Michael said, you can take focus groups or leave them. They provide some interesting snapshots, but they're certainly not representative necessarily. But you keep hearing these young voters who voted for Trump talking about some of the global stuff, they were like, I thought I was voting for the peace candidate, which,
Right.
Michael and I could have argued with them at the time and been like, no, that this you're making the wrong judgment here.
Yeah.
But the fact is that a lot of this bellicose saber rattling around the world is shaking their faith in this. I think especially the young men. The second point is we've highlighted Joe Rogan in the past, but that whole tier of like comics and podcasters, the I don't even know if we want to call them libertarian bros or just bros or whatever they are, who have a lot of influence, have really turned on this ICE stuff
They
very,
have.
very, very
They
hard.
have.
And that cuts through. And then the third piece of this is, I think that's where the virility of this moment, or virality of the moment,
Virality.
matters. Virality of the moment matters the
Virility.
most.
The virility is playing a role here, but more on the ICE side.
That's right.
There you go.
I knew that didn't sound right.
This is the banter. This is the banter that you've come to expect on Two Bearded Jews, right? This is
True.
for all the listeners out there. This is what we do.
But the virality of these moments and the fact that they are going on in social media where they're ubiquitous to people, they're seeing them over and over again. That matters the most with young voters who are disconnected from politics because those people are glued to TikTok. Okay. They may not watch the nightly news. In fact, I know they don't watch the nightly news. Their parents and grandparents may, but they don't.
Yes.
They are not on political Twitter where Michael and I are. They are not reading the New York Times. I mean, the number of look, I teach an elite institution. A number of times I have to explain to my students that they can have free subscriptions to the New York Times, Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal. It's very high every year. Okay.
Yeah.
But they are all over TikTok all day, every day. And when these things go viral, it's reaching those less political young voters who may have
exactly
voted
right.
for Trump, and it is driving those negatives up. And they're already economically disillusioned. That's the point that we have to keep coming back to is on the most important issue, the economy, they are unhappy with Donald Trump. The consumer confidence numbers for January were awful. Or maybe those were December's numbers, but whatever just got released was absolutely awful. Okay. And for young people, they're the most economically precarious.
So I want to just pick on that point really quick. One of the reasons why I think the Alex Peretti shooting broke through, besides just how horrific it was and how clear, look, on the Renee Good thing, if you really wanted to, you could say you could cast some doubt because she was driving a car about, the right. I mean, look, in my view, there's not even a question. The ICE officer murdered her. But on the Peretti shooting, the evidence was just, first of all, it was pretty obvious that this guy was not a threat, and also discrepancy between what you saw in the video and what DHS officials were saying. So, but I also think it's a factor, and you mentioned people seeing this up on their phones. Look, what was half the country doing on Sunday, or more than half the country doing on Sunday? They were sitting home because it was snowing outside, and they were on their phones, and they were watching this video, and that I think created a perfect storm of outrage. But I want to bring one other point before we get to great comment from Migs. I want to get to in a second, but I want to bring something up because this is the most incredible stat I've seen in a long time. I mentioned this in a post I wrote on Friday. And for those of you who are subscribers to The Consequences, you're already familiar with this argument. If you're not, subscribe. The New York Times Siena poll, which had Trump at 58, or I don't know, it was pretty bad. They asked people, they broke it down by college educated, not college educated. I want to just read to you these numbers because they are insane. So, no, I'm sorry. This is actually, no, I apologize. This is on the congressional ballot. They asked voters, who do you support, Democrats or Republicans? Among non-white college educated Americans, non-white, so Black, Hispanic, Asian, what have you, Democrats lead 59-30. Among non-whites who did not go to college, is 59-28. So a 2-point discrepancy, 2 points between college and non-college. Among white college graduates, 57% support Democrats, 36% support Republicans, 21-point gap. Among white non-college educated Americans, 33% are voting Democratic, 59% Republican. I'll do the math for you. That is a 47-point gap between white college educated Americans and white non-college educated Americans. What's interesting, again, this is not a class thing. It is among white people, but you're not seeing this class divide among non-whites, right? The numbers are almost identical Okay. But among white people, if you went to college or didn't go to college, a 47-point gap on which party you're supporting. By the way, on Trump's approval numbers, it's almost identical. It was, let me just find it really quick. It was Trump approval, 65 disapprove, 33 approve. Among white non-college, 57 approve, 41 disapprove, which, by the way, is not a good number, that 41% disapprove among white non-college educated. But among non-white college and non-white didn't go to college, the gap is like 6 points. So it's really striking to the extent to which white non-college educated Americans are the people who are driving Republican support. Without them, there is very little Republican support out there, and I'm not exaggerating. I mean, it's really, and by the way, I think it's mostly men too, because among women there's a 30-point gender gap, which we've never seen before. So this is the problem for Republicans, and this is actually a twofold problem. One is their base is very narrow. It's these white non-college educated voters, but also uh, they are. Let's put it this way: for Republicans to shift their approach to politics, it's very hard to do so because you're going to piss off these white non-college educated voters. So I just think that this just dramatizes how big of a problem Republicans
And,
have. Yeah,
and
go ahead.
okay, so it's not there's not perfect correlation, obviously, but that new argument poll that Michael referenced, in our polling, whites making less than $25,000 a year back Trump by 26 in 2024. His approval with them now is break even. So
Wow.
even with his best demographic, if you assume that there's a lot of overlap in the people making the lowest amounts of money and non-college educated whites, he's bleeding like massively. I
Well,
mean that's a 26-point swing in a year and 3 months.
yeah, that's insane. By the way, I just want to mention Lynn says that the white non-college Americans want white supremacy. And I don't actually want to say I don't agree with that. I think it's actually more that they are economically resentful, they're racially resentful, and they are basically more likely to respond
I,
positively to kind of like racial resentment politics that Republicans run on. And of course, non-white, non-college educated are not as likely to respond positively to that kind of message.
let me just read the whole chart since I'm looking at it. Among 25 to $50,000 a year earners, Trump won them by 23. He's +3 with them right now. Among 50 to 100,000, he won them by 13 and he's -2 right now. So that's a 15-point shift. Among 100,000 and 200,000, he won those by 11. He's up by 2 now. And among those white voters making more than $200,000 a year, he won them by 7 in 2024 and he's now -1. So the shift is the biggest. The two biggest groups of shift
Among
are
poor
among the
people.
poor people. So that is
Yeah.
something, and that matters because if you take a look at places like Ohio and Iowa and Alaska, you got an awful lot of those non-college educated white voters there. They are those are places the Democrats have struggled more and more in. There are also places with crucial Senate races coming in
Yes.
November.
Yes.
And if Trump is sinking with the less well-educated white voters, even, marginally, it's a problem. But if he's really sinking with them, you all of a sudden you do open the door to a Democratic Senate.
Oh, you're absolutely. I wanted to respond. We got a good comment here from commenter named Miggs, who said, first of all, said I want to say I love these conversations. Thank you. We appreciate that. Really, really do. And you said at some point, he said at some point, I would love for you guys to discuss one. Let's assume that Dems get a trifecta in 2028, only 2 or 3 seats in the Senate and 10 to 20 seats in Congress. What should the Democrats do about all the laws and norm breaking that Trump has done? Doesn't care about specific policies or fixes, but publicly, what would it take to accomplish anything? So this is a great question, and if I put a lot of thought into this question because I'm writing actually something right now that that is premised on the notion that Democrats have a good chance of winning a governing trifecta in 2028, and if they do, what should they do with it? And so my view is that Democrats must realize, and I'm gonna go a little far in this one, but let me hear me out. Democrats have got to play political hardball, and they have to act as though uh, they cannot act as though business as usual after Trump. They have to go big because if they don't, I think they're going to have, if they win back the White House and they win back the Senate and they win back the House, it'll be because people have turned on Trump. Democrats have to take advantage of that. So I think that that means they need to do really big things like make DC and Puerto Rico states. Do it first day. That creates 4 Senate seats and potentially 5 to 6, if not maybe 6 or 7 House seats, mostly Democratic seats. They then need to do that. By the way, you need to first get rid of the filibuster. Okay, that's the first thing, or at least reform it. Then they need to end partisan gerrymandering, which will create more competition in the House. I actually would argue that they should expand the size of the House to take into account. First of all, the House has been the same size for more than 100 years. It needs to be expanded. But expanding the House could actually put more Democrats in the House. And lastly, they need to add foreign justice to the Supreme Court. I've written about this to protect uh, all the things I just mentioned. Like DC statehood will get overturned by the Supreme Court if you don't actually add justice to the Supreme Court. It's just the way this court has gone. It's not a conservative majority. It is a Republican partisan majority. So that is what they're going to have to do. And I think also they need to prosecute Trump and all of those, for example, who are responsible for the ICE deportations over the past year. I mean, I think you have to do it. I think they made a mistake in not doing it more aggressively when Biden was elected. They need to do it aggressively. And I want to make one last point about this because I think it's sort of interesting. There was a new report out yesterday about the census numbers for 2030, which suggested that Republicans are likely to pick up 9 seats in the House. Those numbers, I want to say for the record, I think are a bit exaggerated. Okay, they're based in some measure on a sort of linear kind of a narrative that basically suggests that what happened in 2020 when a lot of people left blue states to go to red states will continue. I don't know that's going to happen. But the thing is, what I was struck by is how many Democrats I saw said, well, if we have to build more housing in blue states in order to keep Democratic voters, keep voters from not moving to these other states. Okay, first of all, if that was easy to do, it would happen a long time ago. I don't know that's easy to do. Secondly, I don't know that actually that's why people are leaving. It's one reason why people are leaving, but it's also, let's face it, if you could this progression of people moving from the north to the Sun Belt has been happening for decades. I mean, it's maybe picked up a little bit in recent years, but it's been there for a long time. I don't know that it's a direct way to approach it. But what I was struck by is the Democratic approach to this is like, what's the policy solution we can come up with to deal with the fact that people are leaving blue states to go to red states? And my response is no. What's the political solution? What is the ruthless political solution? And to my mind, it is if you win that trifecta, you create more House seats that lean Democratic. That means making DC and Puerto Rico states, which also, of course, creates 3 to 4, probably 4 Senate seats. So my argument is like Democrats always want to find some policy way to do this as opposed to just being like politically aggressive. And my argument is if Democrats take back the House and Senate and presidency in 28, I think they will, then, well, I shouldn't say I think they will. I think they have a good chance to do. Then they have got to re-level the playing field to give Democrats a better advantage in the Senate, in the House, and the Electoral College. I'm done with my rant. Go ahead.
I largely agree with that. I would say, first of all, that you don't need DC and Puerto Rico to expand the House. And that's the first thing that Democrats absolutely should be doing. They should be trying to do this in 2027 because there's not a real clear argument as to which party that would advance. If you had 25 House seats or something like that, it's not clear that the one party is going to benefit hugely. But what it will do is it will reduce the possibility of a split between the Electoral College and the popular vote. And I think that it's long past time to expand the House, and it's something that needs to happen ASAP. The second answer I would give to that question that Michael answered is a little bit different. I think our big problem in 2009 and in 2021 was in kind of looking at the past battles and looking at, the moment and like our agenda and things. What we have to ask ourselves is what would a Republican trifecta do in 2033?
Exactly.
And how do we see around the corners? Because I'm someone who is skeptical about some of what Michael proposes in terms of the feasibility of it. Okay. But here's what I know for sure. Everything that he proposes could have been done in 2009. Had Barack Obama even had an inkling that we were headed where we were headed,
It couldn't
Um,
be done in 2009. It couldn't be because the Democratic caucus was still composed of a great many Democrats in red states. There are very few
I
Democrats in red states these
we've
days.
we've argued about this before. I really think that like DC and Puerto Rico statehood were not something that the red state Democrats would have gotten up in arms over.
No,
But
they
we don't
wouldn't. They
know
wouldn't.
because no one even proposed it. It wasn't
No one
even
even
on
proposed
the
it.
agenda, and I certainly don't think they would have opposed House expansion, for example. Okay, but like I'm talking about two other things more specifically, though. 2009, Democrats have had two straight wave elections, right? They are headed towards the redistricting cycle, okay, in 2010. It would never have occurred to us as Democrats to say, let's redistrict now so that we don't lose control of these places, so that they don't draw the maps and we're not locked out for a decade or more.
Exactly.
You have to be able to see around the corners. I'll give you another example. All of these things that we're talking about, limits that we place on ICE right now, are things that I think Democrats might have had a shot at passing at least some of it in 2021. But nobody even proposed any of it because they never thought that any of these things were, oh, ICE agents are going to be marauding through the streets in masks and not wearing badges or body cameras on ICE agents. Like some of this is stuff that we could have done had we just seen around the corner.
See,
And
but
we don't
I'm
do a
gonna
good job at that.
I agree. I disagree. I mean, the problem with your argument is that in 2009, right, there was not even a talk about reforming the filibuster, of getting rid of the filibuster. That wasn't even on the table. In part because you had a lot of red state Republican Democrats who just were not going to support it. So you had
Right.
60 votes for in a very small window from basically May to January of 60 votes in the Senate, which is what enabled them to pass Obamacare. And, you know, if Scott Brown loses or if Martha Coakley wins the Senate race in Massachusetts in 2009, maybe we're looking at a different political reality. Maybe Democrats use that 60 vote filibuster proof majority to get some more stuff done. But the fact is, they didn't have that opportunity. And even with 59 seats in the Senate, Democrats allowed Republicans to hold their agenda hostage because they wouldn't get rid of the filibuster. Okay, this was a huge frigging mistake. The difference, though, between now and 2009, and frankly, look, I should say between 2021 and 2022, Democrats were much more successful legislatively in 21 and 22 than they were in '09 and 10, even though they had, what, 50 seats? Or I think it was 50 seats they had. So, and why? Because no, they had 50,
No,
one or
50.
two seats.
50.
50. Because the caucus was unified, except for two people, Manchin and Sinema, right? But the reality is that, like, I'm pretty sure that, like, every Democrat except for those two voted to scrap the filibuster when it came to civil rights legislation.
They did.
And of course, right. So that's a huge shift in just a 10-year, 12-year period. So what's happened is that Democrats have shifted. So what used to be a party that was, heterogeneous, that had a liberal wing and a moderate wing, now basically has a liberal wing, and that's pretty much it. Now there are more moderate Democrats, but nothing on a line with what the Ben Nelsons or Blanche Lincoln or Mary Landrieu's that we saw in 2009 and 10. So, the my position on this is, like, there is a consensus about the Democratic Party to get rid of the filibuster, or at least to reform the filibuster. There's not a consensus on DC and Puerto Rico. There needs to be one by 2029. Now, Miggs, who made the comment before, brought up the question of, like, how do you do this politically? And the way you do it politically is that you make clear to Democrats that this has to happen. That you make clear to Democratic senators that that if you want to get anything done, if you want to keep the Democrats in charge, you need to do this. And I mean, that means playing hardball with people, Mary Patola, if she wins, or Roy Cooper, any of these Democrats. This simply, look, if you don't do this, Democrats don't do this. If they don't expand the Senate and the House, if they don't pack the court, they are going to get royally screwed in 2030. In the first, and let's just say they win a trifecta, or that's the premise we're beginning with. They get screwed in 2030 in the midterms. And at best, if you have a one-seat majority in the Senate, that's not a viable thing. You need a bigger majority. That's why you add states. And I am of the view that if you add DC and Puerto Rico, the political consequences of doing so are minimal at best and will be forgotten by the next midterm comes around. But I've talked too much, so please go ahead, Ryan.
I think it's interesting because on some of these points we diverge wildly, and on some of them we're fully in line. I think you're absolutely right. That was my point about 2009. I don't think anybody cares about DC and Puerto Rico statehood. I don't think that this is an issue that moves voters at all. Um, I
Especially if you do it,
absolutely think
especially if you do it early, especially if you do it like the
yeah,
first week that you have power in
I,
2029.
I agree. My basic attitude on what they can do in 2029 is we have to know how big the majority is because Michael just hit on something. We've argued about this before. I don't think Mary Peltola is going to agree to pack the Supreme Court. She's from a state where Democrats have won one Senate race since the early 70s. And I just don't think that that's something that she's going along with. So, and as Michael said, I think that that matters in terms of DC statehood. However, I think that Michael's 100% right. You need Puerto Rico statehood no matter what. You need to expand the House. And I think that there's another little wrinkle to this, which is learn from 2009. Okay. If you have two wave elections in a row, good elections for Democrats in 2026 and 2028, you're going to have more
Absolutely.
trifectas at states. It's the state level. So you know what you do? You redraw those legislatures in 2029 so that 2030 isn't a wipeout like it was in 2010.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, some of this is about exercising your power at the state level, gaining and caring about the state legislatures too. Because that is where they set the maps for things. And I mean, there are other things that you could explore. And I do think on some of this voting rights stuff, you could at least carve out an exemption to the filibuster. And there are other things. For example, we could move away from geographic districting to like statewide slating kinds of things. You could pass a ban on political gerrymandering if you wanted to. There's a lot of different things that you could do. Now, where I disagree, I think most firmly with Michael is he's presenting things as either or. I think that first of all, you can do this and your policy agenda. I think part of Obama's problem was he
They're
didn't.
they're totally linked. Your ability to pass your Democrats' policy agenda is contingent on all the things I just
No,
described.
I agree with you. What I'm saying is, I don't think that you can like you said, Democrats in blue states are gonna focus on policy solutions, not on political solutions. I think you can do both. I think you could try to make the cost of living cheaper in your states while also playing political hardball. Secondly, I think that we as Democrats have to, I think Michael's right about playing hardball and understanding things, but we've got to get beyond what has always been a problem, which is the focus solely on the national and not on the local and on building parties from the ground up in terms of um, infrastructure and being there in communities, being there. I don't know if I told this story on here before or not, but I went to high school with someone who was the daughter of a liberal or granddaughter of a liberal Pennsylvania governor, and she liked Rick Santorum, the conservative Republican senator. Why? Because her mother had some health issues and he was great on constituent services. We should be doing that, have democratic organizations everywhere that
But
help
Democrats do,
people.
they do that already. They do that already. It's why Democrats
I,
are,
I
you
think
know,
if you go into to some of the first of all urban areas where the machines have decayed, and then you go into some of these red states where, and this is the other point where I disagree with Michael, and I've gotten to it kind of circuitously, but realistically speaking, I think we should be trying and pushing in places like Utah and Kansas, where the educational attainment numbers are pretty good for us, and saying, hey, maybe they've got a shot there if you work at it. It may not happen in one cycle, but I think you can both walk, which is Puerto Rico and DC statehood, and chew gum, which is going after some of these other places simultaneously.
so here's my thing on what they should do in states. I want to get back to my argument in a second, but in states, what they should be doing, Democrats should be doing, is not this pipe dream that they're going to be able to like win Senate races, which they're not going to be able to do. You're not going to win a Senate race in a state where the Trump won by double digits. I mean, there are exceptions. Maybe it happens in Alaska, maybe it happens in Ohio, but those are the exceptions. You're not going to win Arkansas. You're not going to win in Missouri. You're not going to win in Tennessee or Kentucky, and in large measure because those you don't have a bench. I mean, in Kentucky, you do it Bashir, but he's not running for Senate. But in general, you don't have a bench of people who can do it. So what I think they should be doing is they should be pushing referendum, direct democracy. Look, direct democracy referendum is what enabled abortion rights to be protected in Kansas, in Ohio, in I think Missouri, although it might be state at this point by the courts. So that's one thing. But you also saw like in Idaho, they passed a referendum to expand Medicaid. You could do all kinds of things on the referendum front to push Democratic policy agendas, but I think that's a better way to go than to think that you can succeed in winning these competitive races because it's just very, very hard to do. But I want to go back to my point just for a second here. Like, I think the policy, what I'm suggesting is inextricably linked to the policy outcome, to a policy outcome,
Mhm.
which is that it makes it easier for Democrats to further pass their agenda. And I want to make like one sort of meta point here that I think is sort of worth mentioning. In 2009 and 2010, Democrats focused on healthcare. They passed Obamacare, and you could argue, I think, reasonably argue that it cost them the House in 2010. And my view of it always has been that's worth it, right? Democrats exist to use government to help people. That's why Democrats get elected. That's what the whole point of being a Democrat. Like, not willing to do that, not willing to sacrifice a seat or sacrifice a majority to pass something like universal health care, which had been a goal of Democrats for 70 years, then you shouldn't be a Democrat. And so my argument would be like, you pass it, and that's it's worth it if you lose. But that was predicating the idea that if you do those things, Republicans won't try to like undo it. And that's what's changed in the last 15 years. Now, Democrats pass things, Republicans try to repeal it. They try to repeal Obamacare. Look what they've done with Biden's agenda. They tried to undo a lot of what he accomplished. So it's not enough to just pass stuff. You need to maintain power in order to ensure that it's not eviscerated by a Republican administration and by a Republican Supreme Court. That's why you need to insulate Democrats from this constant like pendulum swing of anti-incumbency and say, okay, we come in with let's say we have 51 seats, 51-49. You add 4 seats, you're 55-49. Okay, now you're in a much more advantageous position, and you might be protected enough in the next midterm to. And by the way, you might actually do well next midterm because you actually be able to pass your agenda, and you actually and pass things people actually like. Okay, so that to me is why the policy and this procedural stuff go hand in hand. You cannot succeed. Democrats cannot succeed. And I was going to say one last thing. Democrats have for very long ascribed to this sort of folk theory of American politics, which is that you pass stuff, you do what your constituents want, you'll be rewarded at the polls. We have seen over and over and over and over again that is simply not true. Voters do not reward policy achievements. They do not reward legislative achievements, and you cannot count on that as a way to hold on to power.
So I want to make clear that philosophically, Michael and I are wholly in tune on this. There are some specifics where we disagree, but philosophically, Michael's saying you've got to protect your power. You've got to figure out a way to play hardball. Absolutely right. Okay. And where I disagree with you on policy is I think long term, big picture, policy achievements that people end up liking were down to the benefit of the party that enacted them. Sort of like FDR, Democrats are the party of Social Security, Lyndon Johnson, Medicare. I agree with
Right.
you that in the short term they don't reward you. Okay. Now, where we're disagreeing slightly on states is I look at Utah. Okay, you sent me that chart this morning. Utah is the one red state in the 15. Republicans won 14 of the 15 least college educated states. This is from Doug Sosnick, a Democratic Clinton era strategist.
Yeah.
Democrats won 14 of the 15 most college educated states. The one they did not was Utah. Okay, now Utah is a state that John McCain won by 28 points as Barack Obama was crushing him nationwide. Donald Trump won it by 21 points in 2024 as he was winning. That's a big shift. It's a place where I don't think that we're going to win anything in 2026 in Utah, but in 2032, maybe. And one reason that I think this is important is even if you make DC and Puerto Rico states, you're not going to make dramatic gains in the electoral college. That thing that Michael referred to about, from yesterday about the projections. I agree that there are potential issues there, but what those potential, if we put those aside just for a second to talk about it, it had Texas and Florida gaining 8 electoral votes, okay? And they were mostly coming from blue states. DC and Puerto Rico aren't going to necessarily offset 8 electoral votes. They may, but I don't know how many House seats Puerto Rico would get offhand. So I do think that you still need to look strategically at the Utahs and the Kansases of the world, where demographically things are going in the right way, and say, hey, let's make a long-term play here. Let's look at this so that not for 2026, but for 2032.
No
Um,
disagreement. No disagreement.
and so that's what I would do. In those cases, I want to bring little bits of breaking news in to our discussion.
Yeah.
How big and seismic was Saturday? Well, my poet laureate of America, Bruce Springsteen, has written and released a new song on Saturday.
I
Today.
just saw this. Someone just
I
someone
just
just
saw.
texted it to me. Yeah, someone just
I
texted it to me.
obviously haven't heard it yet, but that when something starts to get into the culture like that, it
Yeah.
tells you something. Second thing is we may have gotten an indication as to where the Senate is going to go. Going into the Republican Senate lunch, um, John Kennedy from Louisiana, or as I call him, Froghorn Leghorn,
Foghorn
um,
Leghorn.
and I think Mike Rounds of South Dakota both came out in favor of splitting off the other five appropriations bills and passing a continuing resolution for DHS. Now they probably have to negotiate. My guess is Democrats would not go for something more than a week or two CR there. Um, but
Yeah.
that is one potential exit strategy, although House Republicans claim they don't have the votes to do that. And the third thing, and Michael will appreciate this, the DSCC was on Twitter bragging that Dan Sullivan just released his fundraising numbers for the last quarter.
Yeah.
And spoiler, they were really awful. He raised like $1.4 million for the quarter, and Mary Peltola outraised him in 24 hours after declaring her candidacy for
Wow.
the entire quarter.
Look, Sullivan is one of the most unpopular
Yeah,
incumbent
you sent that to me
Republicans in
yesterday.
the country. Now, that is Morning Consult, which is a pollster I don't trust. So I don't know how seriously I mean, what's interesting about those polls was when I sent you was that it basically had Collins about
And
double
Sullivan.
digits underwater, Sullivan underwater, and John Ossoff like 20 points above water.
Yeah,
I mean,
and to be clear, they're the only ones that do a favorable, unfavorable for every Senate. I agree with Michael. They're not a great pollster, but nobody else does this.
right.
So it's
Assume that they're off by
interesting.
a little bit, it still like suggests that Ossoff is above water and Collins and
And
Sullivan are not. And look, if you're below water, if you're below 50% and you're an incumbent, it's hard to win re-election. I think Sullivan's at like 39% right now, or maybe low 40s. That's not good. That is not good.
no, and like I said, I always look for what I'd say that the signals that fly below the radar in politics that tell you things. For me, if Sharice Davids is doing a statewide listening tour in Kansas, a
Yeah,
state the Democrats have not won a Senate seat in 90 years, that tells you something about what internal Democratic polling is showing in terms of competitiveness, in terms of where things are problems for Republicans, and specifically those places that are what I would say are between like 10 and 20 points Republican. We've seen a couple of special elections in like R plus 21 or plus 22 districts and things like that. Okay. But Democrats don't need those R plus 21 or R plus 22s. We're talking about places that are, more in the 15, 16, 17 range. Those are the places where if things go really poorly for Republicans, I think you get to the outer edge of competitive in some of those places. And some of those 6 to 12 or 6 to 15 point places are places that become competitive. I think I mentioned this last week that a military veteran got into the race for the open seat being vacated by Nancy Mace. That's Charleston. Okay, and that's a
yeah,
place Democrats won a less gerrymandered seat in 2018 in a wave. And I think I saw that the Cook Political had the PVI at R plus 6 for that district.
yeah.
Well, this woman raised a lot of money in her first day in the campaign, and that's the kind of race that you watch to see, does this become something where Democrats get a durable majority? Because one thing that Michael's saying about, pressing your advantage and being politically ruthless is, realistically speaking, you are not going to be able to do that easily with 219 House seats. You're not going to be able to do that with 51 senators. We are definitely a much more homogenous party than we were in 2009, okay? However, that doesn't mean you're still not going to need, say, 53 senators or 230 House members or something to do these things. So it really matters as to how big these majorities get.
Yeah, look, I think winning. Look, here's the thing: if Democrats can somehow win the Senate in this election, which is possible, and they can increase that margin in 28, then there's no excuse for not to do the things I'm suggesting.
I agree.
If you've got a 53 seat majority or 50, even 52, I mean, you can basically let's say it's 53, you can basically let three red state members
Tall up, do
oppose what
whatever they want.
right. Although here's the thing: the advantage of doing that is there's no advantage of doing that. right. Like, I was thinking about like in 2009 or 2010, all these Democrats were like, I'm not supporting a public option for Obamacare. I don't want to support this measure and that measure. They fought everything. Guess what happened to all those Democrats? They lost because the party, like, it's like people vote by party, not so much even by identity really these days. And I just think that, like, if you're going to pay a price for that, the whole party's paying a price for that, not just the members who voted,
I
even members who voted against it.
I think that that is true to a certain extent. I would point out that the left is again hammering the most vulnerable Democrats in the House over the vote for the DHS funding bill last week. But what I was going to say is that those members, the Marie Guelza Camp Perez types, know their districts pretty well. These are places that
Exactly.
Trump won.
Exactly.
And so I do think if they are in one place and the rest of the party's in another, they have some sense of how to build a brand in those places. Where I think Michael is right is realistically, and John Tester just did his first national interview in a long time, one of my favorite senators, former senator, but he was somebody who managed to survive for 18 years in Montana because he built a brand. The difference is that whereas in his first election he might have been able to run 20 something points ahead of a Democratic president. He was elected in 2006, not, 04 or 08. So we don't know for sure. By 2026 he was only able to run, I think he lost by 7 as
24.
Harris was losing by 24.
Yeah. He
Yeah,
outran her by a pretty big margin.
like 13 points, but it was down from where he was from 2012. She lost by
Right.
more than Obama lost, and his margin, he had lost some of those crossover votes. So there's definitely a limit. The people Michael's talking about from 2009, people like Ike Skelton and John Spratt, long time members from rural places who were pretty conservative, who they were just ripe for the picking in the first Republican wave that came along. Okay, and you're not going to outrun the Tide by 30 points or something anymore. It just doesn't exist.
Yes.
But
Yes.
you do it by 5, 6, 7 points? Yeah, you can. So I'm for those people cultivating independent brands, for giving them the freedom. And this is a really important thing as we get something like this ICE issue, because already the leftmost candidate in several Senate primaries is beating the crap out of their opponents, or opponent on this issue. And it's something to keep in mind that sometimes the one who can win the general election is not the person who satisfies us fully. I mean, the best example of that right now today is John Fetterman. We haven't talked about him much, but Michael brought him up before. Right now, he's got a 53% approval rating, I think. Um, and it's much lower against with Democrats than Republicans. I don't think he has any prayer of winning another Democratic primary,
No, he can't.
but he's very popular with independents and
Yeah, but you know
Republicans.
what? No, but it's kind of bullshit. I mean, he's popular because he's pissing off Democrats.
Right.
So I don't
Right.
I don't think I don't know that I read too much into it. Like, the reality is that he couldn't win a Republican primary either. So
No.
I,
No, you know what he is? Michael and I were talking offline about media personalities who basically have made brands of themselves by being heretics, and that's John Fetterman. He basically votes like a normal liberal on most issues, but absolutely rebels in pissing off the base and poking them in the eye over and over and over again. And he's gotten a lot of adulation from Republicans and independents because he's a heretic. That's really all it comes down to.
I mean, what's interesting question of Fetterman is, if he ran as an independent, would he win?
No,
I suspect he would not. So
because what would end up
I don't think Republicans wouldn't vote for him, and Democrats certainly wouldn't vote for him.
right,
It's like the
right. Like
cinema situation.
even if he gets 5 or 10% more of the Republican vote, let's just say that in a three-way race, Fetterman takes 20% of Republicans, which is an enormously high number. He's still going to split the left of center vote in a swing state like
Yeah.
Pennsylvania with another candidate. So maybe the Republican wins like 42 to, 30 to 28 or something like that. Like, gets nowhere near a majority, but there's just not 70% Democrats. The same problem that we talked about Mike Dugan last week, didn't we? Former mayor of Detroit running as
Yeah,
an
yeah, yeah.
independent for governor. I'm really skeptical that there is, 65, 70% of the vote that's willing to vote for left of center candidates. Which tells me that Dugan is going to face a lot of pressure come, August, September to drop out because otherwise he's going to cost Jocelyn Benson the governorship, and John James would be a disaster for Michigan.
I don't know.
Um,
That's a tricky one because he's very popular. Let me just say, if I could, you buried the lead on the most important story to break today, which is that the Federal Reserve announced they're not cutting interest rates, and they don't expect
because
they don't.
I just saw that 2.5 seconds ago. That's why.
There you go. Okay, okay. And they don't expect to cut rates soon, which is a disaster for Trump because that means you're not going to look. Fiscal policy doesn't really, at this point, is not really going to play any role in improving the economy. Although I guess maybe if the tariff gets overruled, maybe it'll inject some money into the economy. Although I don't think not enough to make a huge difference. The biggest thing to help Trump and the Republicans for the economy is monetary policy. And if the Republicans aren't going to, if the Fed isn't going to cut rates, then they're screwed. I want to mention one other
Michael,
point
let's just make one quick point on the tariffs, which is say the Supreme Court overturns the tariffs. There's like 8 other laws that Trump can reenact them under. Um,
No, no. It's not so easy. It's
eh,
more. I mean, he could try.
he
He
could
might try.
try. I mean, he basically ended up being what Biden did, which is okay. Let's try another way,
Yeah,
and
he
then the
might.
court may smack it down again. The, so that's on the tariffs. That one thing I just noticed from WSB in Atlanta, the FBI is
Yeah, I
raiding
saw
the
this.
Fulton County election hub and the clerk's office tied to the 2020 election. Now, here is my against the grain take of the day. That will hurt Republicans. That is
Yes.
being reported in Atlanta. That there'll be a lot of panic that they're trying to fix 2026 or something like that. It will hurt Republicans because those suburban voters that we were talking about before, with whom they have been bleeding, and not just in like Gwinnett and Fulton and DeKalb, and I'm blanking on the other Cobb, the fourth county in
Yeah.
the Atlanta region. They've started to struggle with the next wave of counties out, if you're looking geographically,
Yeah.
where their margins have shrunk as the Atlanta suburbs have expanded. Those voters are going to recoil from this. They are going
Yeah.
to see strongman tactics.
It's not helpful for them. One other thing I did see, by the way, I just want to mention this really quickly because I wanted to talk about this race for a second. I did see that Emily's List came out and endorsed Jasmine Crockett in Texas, proving once again that Emily's List is useless. But not useless, but they have bad political instincts. But I will say this: I was struck by something. I looked at the predicted markets. I look at the prediction markets because I'm sort of curious to
I mean,
see.
Michael
You
likes
know,
them a lot more than I do,
I
but
think they're kind of useful. But I don't want to overstate it, but I was struck by the fact that I think was it predicted had on the Senate race had it 80-20 for Tallarico, which I think is, I mean, I don't know. I mean, you take that for whatever you want, but I thought it was sort of interesting.
well,
Uh,
here was the interesting thing on that race. I did not see the debate that they had Saturday afternoon. For obvious reasons, I was distracted. Um, but uh, there's an interesting race down in South Texas. I think the guy's name is Bobby Paldillo or something like that. He's some
yeah,
sort of singer. And he is the party favorite to challenge a Republican congresswoman down in South Texas. And he and Tallarico have endorsed each other. And his primary opponent and Crockett just endorsed each other yesterday. She's doing an event for the primary opponent. And it shows again that it doesn't seem like she has a field. That's a conservative place, South Texas.
yeah,
And it's the place where Democrats have been bleeding voters, although many of them are still registered Democrats who could vote in a primary.
yeah,
Um, and so that is something that I'm watching there. And Tallarico is on the air in Spanish language media, and Crockett is not. And by the way, one thing that we should really really make sure to point out to people, this is really really relevant right now because that race is in like a month.
yeah.
The
It's soon.
Texas primary is super early. It doesn't feel like we're at primary season yet at all, but that Texas primary is right on I think it's like the first week in March, maybe something like that.
I think
But
that's right.
it is coming really quickly. And if Crockett's not yet on the air and she's not in Spanish language media, if she doesn't get on there quickly, early voting has to start pretty soon in that
Yeah.
race.
So
And so that's going to happen really quickly.
I just looked at Kalshi, and that has uh, Tellerico 79-20 against Crockett, and then the Republican side they have Paxton 63-27. Um, so take that what you will. I mean, they also have Flatner 61-41, which doesn't add to 100, but whatever. Over with Janet Mills. I still, I haven't followed. I don't see any polls recently in that race. I still think Mills wins,
Well,
but we'll see.
there's two things that I would note that are important in that regard. I was trying to look up the Texas date, but I can't find the date offhand. Um, but it's March 3rd. Okay, there we go. It's March 3rd. The main race is a lot less formed because that primary is in August. Like you're talking about a difference of like 5 months, I think. Or maybe
Yeah.
it's June. It's months of extra running room. The other thing is somebody was out there floating the thing that I have mentioned over and over and over again for a year and a half. That is Susan Collins is still not officially declared reelection.
I'm aware of
Uh,
that. I'm
and,
aware.
and I just wonder. Someone asked me, I was like, "Do you really think she's going to retire?" And I said, first of all, there's a history of this in Maine. Olympia Snowe, George Mitchell both did the same thing. But secondly, I could see her wanting to wait till the very last minute for two reasons. The first is she's in a blue state fighting the tide and probably doesn't want to lose her career with a loss or end her career with a loss. But secondly, she's the appropriations chairwoman. And right now, Republicans have been very, very, very deferential, even including by his standards, Donald Trump, to her departing from the party, pushing for things that they don't necessarily like, and it's because they know she's the only one who can hold that seat. If she retires, all of a sudden all that goes away because she's useless to them.
Yeah,
So I don't think that she's necessarily planning to retire, but I think she's holding the option open. Otherwise, she would have declared a campaign at this
I agree.
point.
I actually think there's a reasonable chance she does not run. By the way, I just want to mention in the on Kalshi, they asked people the Democratic nominee for Senate in Kansas, and Sharice Davids is at 22 and Christy Davis is at 50. That's a buying opportunity for those of you out there because if Davids gets in the race, she will be the nominee. I have no doubt in my mind. And
Oh
she's
God,
right
yeah.
now she's five
Uh,
five to one. That's a pretty good option. So let's talk
Notably,
about
if
your
Sharice
yeah.
Davids runs, the party will get behind her. She is their one like star.
Yeah. It would be
In
against Marshall, right?
Yeah, it's Roger Marshall,
Roger
and I don't
Marshall.
remember where he was on that chart that you sent me, in terms of favorable or unfavorable. But like I said, Kansas is the second most highly educated red state among the bunch, and it is a state there. If you look at the margins, I'll pull them up while Michael is talking on the margins. What I just did with Utah, but it is a state that people have missed that has moved leftward
I agree. It has.
in
People
the
have not paid
Trump
attention to
era
it.
substantially. Trump won that by 16 points, okay, in 2008. And again, that was a very good year for Donald Trump in 2024. In uh, John McCain won it by 15 points in a very, very bad
What
year
was it in 20?
for Republicans. 2020, let's see. I always have to go with the middle America states to find where they are on the map each time.
Yeah,
2020
Trump
was
won by
uh
15.
Yeah, it was a little under 15. It was 14 and a half. But those are those states where the margin from 2020 to 2024 did not increase significantly for Trump are the states where they've moved leftward.
Wait, by the way, it just jumped. Sharice Davies just jumped from 22 cents, 26 cents. I don't know. Maybe someone was listening to me
Yeah, Michael,
on
it's
this.
you. You're an influencer.
I didn't buy. I didn't
Um,
buy. So it's not me. I assure you. Wait, like I got to finish up
but
relatively
but
soon. But I want.
can we
Yeah,
just
go
put a
ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
can we put a finer point on what we just said with numbers? Okay. The swing in the country, you had said this before, you weren't sure, but the swing in the country, it was 4.8 that Biden won and Trump won by like 1.5. So you're talking about like
1.5.
6.3 points,
Yeah.
is the national swing. So if a state moved by a half a point to the right, that means they actually moved like 6 points to the left
Yeah.
vis-a-vis the nation. And so those are the states where Democrats should be looking to say,
Yeah.
hey,
I agree.
maybe it doesn't happen in 2026, but if we get a big enough, here's the thing about Kansas. What we just say, 16 points? Well, that's not that much different than Ohio or Iowa, which was 13 points.
Look, I used to say for the record, if Sharice Davies runs for Senate, she must look. She's in a pretty safe seat, and she's in no danger of losing this cycle. No, maybe she's worried about redistricting that's gonna hurt her in 2030. So maybe that's what's driving this.
Well, I
But
actually, the theory was, and this was my theory last fall, was that it was a brushback pitch at the Republicans trying to redistrict Kansas, last fall, where she was saying, okay, you guys want to try to make this happen. If you draw me out of my district, I might just win the Senate seat. But now they seem to not have the votes to do that. So if she's actually exploring that now, it would seem to suggest her polling
Yeah, but they could do
is
it in 2030 when
that's true.
there's new maps are drawn. They could do it. They could do it then. That's a
They could,
possibility. Um,
definitely.
and don't forget, Kansas does have a two-term Democratic senator, Laura Kelly. It's a Democratic
Governor.
governor. Excuse me. Speaking of governors, I want to finish up with this. Your home state of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro has announced he's running for re-election. He launched a new book, which is always a precursor to running for president. He is running for president clearly in 2028. And in the book, he made some sort of, I think, tough accusations against Kamala Harris, including that her staffers asked if he was a double agent for Israel, which seemed controversial until Tim Walz came out and said that he was asked the same question about China. Now, I understand why it's different for Jews when it comes to Israel because dual loyalty is often a anti-Semitic canard that is used against Jews. However, I did get the sense that Shapiro may have overreached a little bit on this one, accused Harris of sort of veiled anti-Semitism, which may have been a little bit unfair. Um, then there was a big Axios piece that came out that suggested that no one in Pennsylvania Democratic politics likes Josh Shapiro, which
Yeah.
I've heard that from other people, although I never heard it as distinctly as I heard it on this article. And I'm curious what you make of it, because I actually don't think this is as big a problem as it would seem. But what do you think?
So first of all, I want to clarify. This is actually a story that goes back like a month or two. Tim Alberta did a profile of Shapiro in the Atlantic, and Axios just interviewed him on it. So all of a sudden, it got a bunch of new headlines. I think it's true that Josh Shapiro is not a favorite of the political class in Pennsylvania, and there are three reasons for that thing. One is he has some hard elbows, and politics, that there are only so many seats and things that people can run for, and he has certainly not been shy about that. And secondly, he and John Fetterman hate each other, dating back to their days on the state pardon board,
Yes.
where Fetterman thought that Shapiro was more worried about the politics of some of it. He was more worried about, the what he thought was the importance of the cases and the cases that the inmates could make. And Shapiro was more cautious on that stuff. And then the third thing I think is that he is, obviously ambitious. He's obviously brash, and I don't know that he always like, stokes the egos of local officials and others like that. He's more interested in voters. And so I really don't think that this matters at all. I mean, we saw over Israel last year, the state treasurer nominee, I want to say, did not get endorsed by Shapiro because she openly called for Kamala not to pick him to be the VP. So there are definitely fissures in the Pennsylvania Democratic Party. What I thought was an interesting contrast, and let me preface this by saying I loathe Selena Zito. I loathe the cult of Selena Zito on the right, that they think that she's some great reporter. There are a lot of questions about the relevancy and the accuracy of her reporting. Okay, but she just did a very nice Washington Post column on Josh Shapiro at some county fair or state fair or something, in a very red place where he goes, and he's done a lot to cultivate voters in Pennsylvania. And here's the thing: people are like, "Well, this is a rocky kickoff for things," and it may be. And look, some of the people on the left are saying, "Well, some people are really good at their state politics, and they don't translate when they go to a national level." Here's the thing: Josh Shapiro's case to 2028 primary voters is going to be the election results in November. If he wins by an overwhelming margin, and unlike 2022, he is facing the strongest possible Republican nominee. Stacey Garrity, who was endorsed by Donald Trump yesterday, is the state auditor. She's a veteran. She's won statewide office twice, and I think she got more votes than Trump, or won by a bigger margin than Trump in 2024. That's the best they've got. If Shapiro beats her by double digits in a swing state, he's going to basically say to people, want to win? And that's going to be his case to voters. Now, there are
Yeah,
other people who
yeah.
can say the same thing. Andy Bashir is going to make the exact same case, saying, I'm from a red state. Look at how successful I've been. Do you want to win? But
By the way,
Shapiro is going to
just say
have
for the
to.
no, go ahead. Sorry, finish up.
Shapiro's gonna have the case of this is the tipping point state in 2028, almost certainly again. Okay, and I take it off the board.
So, okay, two things on this. First of all, I just think for what it's worth, like Shapiro is so clearly running for president that I do wonder if it becomes a problem for him in his gubernatorial reelection campaign. I mean, the fact is that
People keep saying that, but and I'm not just talking about this race. I'm talking about in general. But like, it didn't hurt George W. You
it
know,
didn't.
it
It didn't.
really.
I mean, you could argue it hurt
I,
Jeb, maybe, but I will just say for the record that I think for what it's worth that actually no, Jeb lost in '94. Never mind, that doesn't make sense. I guess I'll say for the record that I think it's probably not a huge problem because it's such a good environment for Democrats next November, but it might be a closer race than we expect.
that
Um,
will be their number one point of attack, though,
sure.
is that he just doesn't care about Pennsylvania. He's just running for president.
Oh yeah, that's what they would use. So, but I will say this: the thing about him being too ambitious. Um, People said that about Bill Clinton in Arkansas in 1992, and at the end of the day, it didn't matter all that much. And look, if you're a Pennsylvania politician, Pennsylvania Democrat, I mean, you have every incentive in the world to basically support Shapiro because A, you might get a job in the federal government, but B, also it opens up the governor race for the Democrat to run. I don't know. I mean, this is an interesting story. I think it doesn't speak great of Shapiro that he is, that a lot of people don't, a lot of Democrats don't like him in the state. I don't know if it matters all that much. We we the 2028 thing is so early, and it's sort of hard to talk about it because I don't really know uh, what it's so hard to know where things are going to stand. And you're right. Like if Shapiro doesn't win big, in November, it's going to be hard for me to case to he should be the nominee. I just want to say one thing about this. I mentioned this last week, and I'll bring it up again. I just think that right now it looks like it's a race between Shapiro and Newsom. Those are the two sort of leading front runners. I mean, I am struck by two other data points, which is Pete Buttigieg. Um, they did a poll of black voters. He was polling at 0%. I mean, nobody wants to
Been
talk
his
about
problem
this,
all along.
but no one wants. But the fact of the matter is that like the fact that he's gay is a real problem in the black community, and it's going to be hard for him to build support. I mean, there's just no way around it. I mean,
Let me give you the data point, Michael,
yeah,
that proves this out. There were precincts that set record numbers in California in 2008 voting for Barack Obama and voted in favor of the gay marriage ban there.
right. I mean, look, no one again. If you look at public opinion polling, the group of Americans who are most, hostile to same-sex marriage, and it's still a majority, but that were most hostile are Black Americans. It's just a fact, and so it's a problem for him. It's a big, big problem for him that people don't want to talk about because then you sort of suggest that Black people are bigoted against gays, but the reality is like that's a factor. It just is. The numbers don't lie. One more point I want to make about this though, about you mentioned about the Harris thing when Harris and Shapiro got in that fight. Harris kind of started that fight. She kind of went after Shapiro in her book, which
Mm.
it continues to lead me to this conclusion that she is very seriously considering running for president. And I will say it again, and no one wants to hear this because no one wants this, but at least people who are like in elite circles wants this. If she runs, and she might, she will be a formidable candidate, and I would put her down as a front runner. She will have almost certainly have stronger Black support than any of the other Democrats who are running, and she has name recognition. She'll be the elephant in the room. It's be very hard to stop her. I'm not saying she is going to run, but if you put a gun to my head, I'd say I think she probably doesn't run. But that is a very not a strongly held view on my part. I think it's possible she runs, and if she does, Democrats have to deal with it because she could be the nominee.
I agree with you that things are so hard to understand. It was actually struck me, or hard to talk about at this point. It struck me this morning that we were talking an awful lot in the middle of this month about healthcare. And they were talking about how by the end of the month, we've got to get some deal on the ACA subsidies. We got to make this happen. And you know what no one's talking about today? Healthcare. Why? Because the Renee Good and Alex Pratty murders happened. And so we're all talking about ICE. And especially in the Trump era, the velocity of our politics is incredible. And we are not going to see people start really campaigning in earnest now for probably until early 2027. We're talking about a calendar year. And no one's going to cast a ballot for 2 years. you're going to have 20 something candidates in there. And the other thing is, it depends on which states are at the front of the nominating process. Because, for example, if they're smaller states, Josh Shapiro has always been an outstanding retail politician. Kamala Harris has not done as well at that. In a lot of cases, I know people when Shapiro was running for local office, he knocked on had him knocking on their door, and he just fits in really well and is warm and friendly and it works well. Do I think Harris is the front runner if she runs? Yeah. Do I think she comes close to winning the nomination? No. Because realistically speaking, well, I think she's gotten better and has experience. And I think I said this last week. She's gotten better. She has experience in running these campaigns that other people don't have. People in politics always chase the fresh flavor, so to speak, or the new thing. And she's got two losses on her record. And I said this last week. She never won a tough race in her life. Um, she had a lot of money. She had a lot of institutional support in 2019 and flamed out. In 2024,
Shapiro hasn't won a tough race. Shapiro and Newsom haven't run tough races either.
well, I mean, Shapiro didn't have a hard race, but he won a swing state as the governor. And remember, these are not going to be
against a truly awful candidate.
Well, that's why I said
who barely ran.
That's why I said that November really matters to him. But it's people, it's not just Shapiro. It's Mark Kelly, who's won two tough races, and also comes from a swing state. It's maybe Ruben Gallego, who has won a tough race, albeit against a terrible candidate, who is a young Hispanic male veteran, fits all the boxes where Democrats have struggled. It's Andy Bashir, who's won tough races in a red state. It's maybe people from Michigan, Slotkin or Whitmer. Like a lot of it depends on who's running.
Whitmer's not running. So let me say this about.
One last Shapiro point before I forget. You know who the biggest cheerleader for Josh Shapiro to land in the White House in 2029 is?
Who?
Dave McCormick.
Oh, yeah.
Because if Shapiro is the president, all of a sudden McCormick is favored for re-election in the midterm in 2030. If Shapiro is not president, he may well be McCormick's opponent in 2030 as the outgoing governor. And if you have a Republican in the White House, certainly he crushes McCormick.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting point. I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. It's good for McCormick. Let me make one other point, just to keep something in mind that in 2020, in 2000 and beginning of 2006, if I told you that Barack Obama was going to be the Democratic nominee in 2008, you would have thought I was crazy. If I told you in 2014 that Donald Trump would be the Republican nominee in 2016, you thought it was crazy. So I bring this up just to make the point that, a lot can change. And
even when the front runners have won, John McCain, for example, they've usually crashed and burned and then resurrected their campaigns.
Right. I think that, look, it's one thing I think I always like to point out that candidates usually don't run and win the first time. Trump is an obvious exception. Obama is an obvious exception. I guess actually, you know what? I take it back because I guess you could look at the last couple of presidents. I mean, Biden ran before, but Bush had never run before. So maybe I'm wrong about that. I mean, I think it used to be the case. Maybe it's less
Clinton
the case now.
Never run before.
Clinton never run. Bush had never. Reagan had run. Bush had run. Nixon had run. Carter had not run.
I actually think it was something that was more true in the past.
Yeah,
and I think
maybe you're right. Maybe you're right.
First of all, as state politics have gotten bigger and more expensive, that, especially a big state politician has gotten used to running the kinds of campaigns they need to run in terms of the size of the operation, is one possibility. I also think that you're pointing at Bush, you're pointing at Obama. We're talking about the internet era, right? Maybe the internet has changed something in terms of name recognition, in terms of the ability to capture, media cycles and things. I'm not exactly sure what the reason is, but it certainly seems to me that in the internet era, you've had some Republican nominees who were sort of the next up because they lost the last time, but they've lost the general elections, and you've had now, Bush, Obama, Trump, no experience.
Right. Wait, I gotta say one thing. Someone just in the comments that Cami said people hate establishments since about the 1980s. Let's step back on that one. You read my book on somewhere up here, American Maelstrom on the 1968 election. That process began post 68. That's how McGovern was the nominee in 72. It was how Carter was the nominee in 76. I just want to, I would make this point because I don't think people don't understand it enough that, I wrote a book about 68. I think it's a really important year, important election. But maybe the biggest thing came out of the election was that it ended the closed primary system. And it basically created open primaries, which meant that you had, so previously, anti-establishment candidates just couldn't win because there was no path. You had to go through
Yeah.
state parties to win and to win a nomination, and it was very hard for an anti-establishment candidate to do that. I mean, there are exceptions, but it's rare. But post 68, it became a lot more viable of an option. So that's how you got McGovern in 72, Carter in 76. Reagan wasn't really an outsider, although he wasn't really Republican establishment in 1980.
No, and in
But
fact, as late as 79, the establishment thought he couldn't win a general election.
that's
There was
right. That's right.
pressure. Jerry Ford was waiting for a draft campaign to get him to run again because they didn't think Reagan could win.
So there's no ton of open primaries, Kami. Every primary is open. So there are caucuses in some cases or primaries,
Wait, wait, wait. Let me clarify. Mike, I think you're confusing this with the idea of an open primary in which
with
independents can
yeah,
vote.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
What
yeah. Fair
Michael
enough.
is talking about is before 1972, the majority of delegates were not selected by primary elections. They were
Yeah,
selected by like party conventions and things. In
right.
fact, the one outsider who captured a nomination that year, Barry Goldwater, his people spent a lot of time figuring out how do we capture these delegations.
Yeah,
And I remember, I think it was Henry Cabot Lodge got to the convention in 64, and he had been the vice presidential nominee in 1960, and he looked at like the delegate list and said, "Who the fuck are these people? Like these are
no,
not the party insiders
R-
who used to
Richard
control those
Daley.
things."
Richard Daley was the mayor of Chicago. Basically said the same thing in 72. Went
Yeah,
to the convention in Miami.
yeah.
So I bring this up point just saying like there might be someone we're not considering to be the nominee. I mean, I think one interesting person who no one talks about is Raphael Warnock if he decides to run. I don't know if he's going to run or not. I mean, if Ossoff wins
Yep,
in a
yep.
cakewalk, does he run? I doubt it, but it's possible. Um, I'm just saying is that a lot can happen between now and 2028, and it should be a crowded field because the fact is it should be a good year for Democrats. I mean, I think if they do well in 26, the assumption will be they'll do well in 28. And again, you don't have an incumbent running on the Republican side. JD Vance doesn't look a very fearsome candidate to run against. So I think it's the possibility of a really open race. But I still think I still think it's likely if Harris runs. I think she's a good bet. If she doesn't run, I think it's probably Shapiro or Newsom. But again, it could be somebody else. But it's really hard to break through. And one thing, I mean, it's important to point this out. Like Obama broke through in '08, but Obama was like an unusually good politician. I mean, a very unusually good politician. And anti-establishment candidates, Democratic Party usually actually don't win. I mean, Clinton was, even though he was from Arkansas, was actually kind of the establishing candidate or became the establishing candidate in 92. John Kerry was definitely the establishing candidate in 2004. Al Gore, without a doubt. And Hillary was in 2008, fending off Bernie Sanders. Biden again in 2020. So it is hard to beat the establishment candidate or the candidate that has the most support from Democratic insiders. And right now, I mean, I'm curious what you say about this, but who do you think Democratic insiders would support, Shapiro or Newsom? I would guess Shapiro, but because I think they don't trust Newsom. But
I
I
I
don't know.
mean, I really think that it could be any of the swing state people, Warnock, Kelly. Like, I just think that there's a hugely powerful argument that you look at this crop of 7 swing states that Joe Biden won, that Kamala Harris lost. And especially when you're talking about Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, the 3 biggest of those states. Um, that somebody who said, I have demonstrated electoral success in these places, I'm going to take this state off the map. We're going to start to see polling in early 2028. I guarantee you will see polling before people go to the polls about a general election race between those people that their campaigns have put out
Man,
there
maybe.
saying, look, like I take Pennsylvania off the map or I take Georgia off the map. And so I really think that's true. And look, we don't know what the issues are going to be. We don't even know the order of the states. We don't know how social media is going to play in necessarily. Like, I do think that this point in the comments about authenticity matters. The one who comes off as most authentic, I think it's something that's really hurt Kamala Harris twice now. is that
I
most
don't.
people.
I don't agree. I'm not sure I agree with that actually.
I really don't think. I think Kamala Harris comes off like what I would call a Barack Obama era politician, which is to say she's on script. She
Look,
is on message.
I'm I'm going to keep pointing this out. In the places that saw Kamala Harris the most, that were the most attuned to her campaign, she did better. And I think people sort of forget that. I think
That
she had a very good.
I wrote a whole column on this after the election. I'm not saying she ran a bad campaign. I'm not saying that she was a bad candidate. I would say she ran a B plus campaign. But what I am saying is I think that people in a social media world crave authenticity. They crave someone who doesn't come off like a scripted politician. And it is something Donald Trump is one of the great ironies of our era is that Donald Trump comes off as authentic to a lot of people, despite the fact that he's the antithesis of authentic in any way, shape, or form. He's playing a character. Okay.
Yeah, but no, but his id and his ego is authentic, and you
I
see
mean,
that. So I think
one thing that's helped Shapiro, he goes on sports talk radio all the time because he's like everybody else in this region and he's sports crazy. And Gallego has his own elements of this. Warnock has his own elements of this. Warnock's a preacher. He can really
I agree.
speak. So my answer is who comes off as authentic? Who comes off as real? Who can best use TikTok? I'm not on there,
No, no,
but
no. That's look. The most important question, as it always is, of Democratic primary, is who can win black voters. That's the most important question, and that will ultimately decide who wins the
the,
election in 2000, the nomination in 2028.
there's one
All that
other
matters.
thing to keep in mind about Democratic primaries versus Republican primaries. The reason Trump got through in 2016 is that the establishment couldn't coalesce around one opponent. What Democrats have been very, very good at, they did it with John Kerry against Howard Dean. They did it with Joe Biden in 2020, is they coalesce around someone right at the moment they get scared about the insurgent. Dean, Sanders, whoever it is, they coalesce. I think that if someone from either a very blue place, Newsom, Harris, or someone from the Bernie AOC wing of the party looks to be gaining ground, they're going to coalesce around one of these swing state people. They're going to throw their muscle behind them, and I would put my money on that person, whomever it may be. But again,
Maybe.
you're going to have 20 people running. You're going to have who looks good in debates and cuts through. I mean, it's just so
And look,
random and variable.
everyone's gonna run, and you should, because it's a good year for Democrats. And my thing on running for president is that you should always run for president if you're an ambitious Democrat. You want to be president someday, because you know you don't know if lightning is going to strike. And like people said, Obama shouldn't run in 2008, and they were wrong, because I mean, if you have a chance and to win, you take it. And that's what a presidential politician should do. And if I'm looking at the state of the country now, where I think it'll be in 28, I mean, if I were a Democrat, I'd be running in 28,
Can
because
I make
go
one
ahead.
exception to what you're saying?
Yeah.
I think somebody who's Warnock or Kelly, who's on the ballot for their in cycle, have to think much harder about that decision because you don't have an office if you don't flame out in the primary. I think Kelly can run for both because they have a really late filing deadline in Arizona. But
So I'll just say this about Kelly. Um, have you heard that guy talk? He's just not a very exciting speaker.
I
I
agree.
actually don't really buy them. I don't buy the Mark Kelly boomlet thing at all. I mean, I just don't think he's that appealing of a candidate, and I don't think I think on paper he looks good, but I think in reality he's just not that exciting a candidate. Having said that, he did win two elections in Arizona that were close elections. Granted, he faced off against horrible candidates, but he did win two elections in Arizona. So at some point we should talk about the Republican side, because I do think that while Vance will almost certainly be a front runner, I would imagine that a lot of Republicans will run. Brian Kemp, Chris Sununu, a lot of I'm sure others out. Maybe I don't think Rubio will run, although you never know. I just think Vance is uniquely vulnerable to a primary challenge because he's such an
My
unappealing figure.
my conservative buddy keeps saying, "Oh, Kemp's gonna run." I I really think that if the Kemps and the Sunus of the world are not delusional, they will understand that there is no recipe for their version of conservatism in today's GOP. That's not to say that Vance is not vulnerable. That's not to say that there is not a lane for somebody else. I think he's not particularly skilled as a politician. And I think that even if they have a Vance Rubio ticket from day one, which I think is a possibility, um, it's not a sure thing. I think DeSantis runs again. I think a lot of people get it. But what I don't expect to happen with the Republicans is I just don't think that the Reagan Republicans are going to have the comeback that they think that they are. That the Brian Kemp, Chris Sununu, less government, no populism types are going to succeed. And there was an interesting story the other day that the White House is really pissed off about at Josh Hawley because he's gearing up to run. Like a guy like that who's going to run on full on conservative populism, he strikes me as a much more likely prospect than Brian Kemp selling 1980 Ronald Reagan type agenda stuff.
Look. Let me just say this. Look, if Kemp has to run, what else is he going to do? The same goes for Sununu. I mean, they may not win, but they have to run because if they don't run, that they blow their chance of ever being a Republican nominee. Somebody asked,
what is he going to do? Sununu's a lobbyist now, right?
yeah, I know, but he didn't run for Senate because he wants to run for president. Same with Kemp. Somebody asked why I think Rubio's not going to run, and pretty much because if he does, he'd have to give up Secretary of State. He'd have to start running in 2027. He'd have to give up Secretary of State. I think that because he's in the administration, it would be very difficult for him to beat Vance. I just think that would be a major challenge, and I just don't see it. I mean, look, the reality is like Vance is almost certainly going to be the front runner, and the best argument against Vance is an outsider like a Brian Kemp or another Republican governor from somewhere, but not somebody who's been in the administration. So if I were and by the way, if I were Rubio, I would just sit this one out and run in 4 years, run in 32 or 36. I mean, he's only 54 years old now. He's relatively young, and I just think it's a guy said that about DeSantis. I thought DeSantis, my whole thing on him was like it was a huge mistake to run against Trump in 2024. He was never going to beat him, and all he's going to do is going to alienate Trump, alienate MAGA, and it's exactly what happened. He should have just waited until 30. He should have waited until 28. He probably would have been the front runner, but he didn't because he's a schmuck, and now he's probably politically
very crappy at politics. Like
he sucks. Well, yeah, this is
if Democrats had nominated the right candidate in 2018, Ron DeSantis is never anything other than a backbencher who goes on Fox News a lot.
Okay, but I agree with you. But the fact is, he won 2 elections in Florida. He had without Trump running in 24, he's a good candidate. But with Trump on the ticket,
right.
I mean, no one should have run. They all should have just dropped out. And DeSantis running just screwed himself.
I agree with that.
Ted Cruz is going to run. People are going to run. I mean, look, you know my whole thing. This is like Trump Jr. is the long shot. All right, listen, it's 3 o'clock.
Hell,
I got to go.
Let me just make one last 20-second
point.
Sure. If we have 2 big fields, like we had in 2008, I don't think we've had an election since then like that. One real big question is in some of these open primary states, and here I'm talking about open primaries, independents can go vote in either primary. A lot may come down to which party's primary the independents decide to vote in.
Right.
If you have, 15 candidates on either side. So it's just all unknown. It's fun to talk about, but it's just very unknown as to where things are.
I agree. All right, guys, we got to finish it up here. Sorry, Larry, you just joined, man. Too late. Sorry, we're on for 2 hours. We gotta go. I got stuff to do. And but this was as great as always. Thank you all for joining us. I apologize for the initially videoless me from the first 15 minutes, but I was back. Thanks. We're back in 1 week with Abby Livingston. It's going to talk to us next week. Is that right?
Yep. From Puck. She's going to be on with us at 1:30 next week.
I don't know if she's Jewish. She definitely doesn't have a beard. But nonetheless,
but Michael very generously agreed to be outnumbered by the number of people who think Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band are the greatest American band ever for a half hour.
Wait, hold on. Just want to be clear. I love Bruce Springsteen.
I know.
I love them. But the Grateful Dead are the best American band. And it's not even a debate.
I'm just Abby's another diehard Springsteen is the greatest person. So and listening. My
You
benefit.
are living up to your reputation as a white guy from Philadelphia.
That's
No
right.
doubt about it.
That's right. That's
As a
absolutely
as
right.
a white guy as a white guy from Bucks County, I can say the same thing. I love Bruce Springsteen. All right, thanks everybody. We'll see you next week. Have a great week, and stay warm out there. The snow it's ugly out there, but do the best you can, and we'll see you next week. Bye bye.
Take care.